Thank you, David. Our next panel will be on measuring impact. So from claims about tangible impact reliant on data derived from individual power meters to offset projects that rely on trust models outside of decentralized oracles, this panel will cover it all. So I'm thrilled to welcome on stage Beth from Funding the Commons, Isa from Impact Hub Istanbul, Carl, he's an open source observer, FEMS, working in grants evaluation, and James from Golem Foundation. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Beth from Funding the Commons. You already know all about that from what we just heard, but if everyone else would go through and introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your work as it relates to measuring impact, and then we'll go into our questions.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm FEMS. I work in grant framework assessment and measurement for Plurality Labs, who is working for the Arbitrum DAO and building a pluralistic grant framework program. And how it relates to impact is that right now in Milestone 1, we are measuring types of experiments as well as funding other tools that could solve the problem in how do we create decentralized grant frameworks and transparency, and one of those, of course, is OSO. So,
all right, that's my cue. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Carl. I'm working on a project called Open Source Observer. We were one of the people that came out of like the Funding the Commons community at Protocol Labs. So we were working on HyperCerts previously. We spun out just a couple months ago and are building a tool that's hopefully going to help measure impact of open source software contributions so that any funder who wants to put more money towards growing developers, growing on-chain users, or any other type of metric that they might have, will have a suite of free open source tools they can use to monitor, track, and ideally fund things. So we're building that. We're excited to be working with Arbitrum, working with Optimism, working with the Protocol Labs network to help bring data to the question of how do we decide what to fund and measure it over time.
Cool. I'm James. I'm the head of community at Octant, which is a project that started somewhat recently from Golem Foundation. If there's any people who've been around in the Ethereum ecosystem for a while, you might remember Golem has a very large war chest, and so we're staking 100,000 ETH and then using those staking rewards to in part fund public goods. And we just ran our first round pretty recently. HyperCerts, among a few others, were some recipients. And where we're at right now is trying to define like where this threshold is in terms of what projects have previously built and being able to measure that in an effective way to understand if there's like a credibility factor there that we can be confident in where projects who receive funding in future rounds, like trying to define like where that line is so that we can be confident from a reputation sort of aspect that the funding is going to go to good causes. So that's what we're going to be chatting about today.
Hi everyone, my name is Aisha. I'm the co-founder of Impact Hub Istanbul. We're part of the world's largest social innovation network, Impact Hub. What we do is we try to bring together impact-driven individuals and organizations together and support them in their projects or initiatives that are focusing on various different social issues. I'm slightly outside of this world that the conference is mostly about, but I think our world, especially within social impact, focusing on impact startups, impact investing, and also specifically the topic of private sector organizations focusing more on sustainability work. I think in all three topics, we have a lot to learn from the philosophies and the methodologies of Web3 and how we can adopt ourselves in focusing on sustainability towards within this world. So I'll be focusing on some of the issues and bringing those to your attention and putting out some provocations and see if these guys can maybe find some solutions to it.
So a major question that came up when we were kind of planning this is how do we define impact? So what does it mean in this context? And for example, there were two divergent but complementary meanings coming from themes and also from Aisha. So maybe if each of y'all can speak to these different areas and then we'll think how they come together.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay, it's still there, sorry. In our case, we're still in the early stages to determine what the community sees as valuable. So for us to develop a grant framework to say, like, this is what the impact is and this is what the key areas of focus, tends to not work, and we recognize that within the DAO space. And so in order for us to determine like what is impactful, we first sense make with the community and then use different testings and tools to then determine whether or not that information is actually relevant and can actually relate to the community. Because the idea is not to have a centralized board decide how funds are being distributed and how impactful it is to the community. It is the community to drive that. And so for us, impact is really a goal or a direction that is made by the community, and then from that we measure whether or not it was impactful or a good use of funds.
I think from my perspective, what Feems just explained, I think what you guys are doing, we're kind of focusing at the end goal, kind of more towards worldly issues, whereas the digital world needs to kind of somehow attach to what's going on in the offline world. What I define as impact is what we see every day on the streets, in our environment, various different social issues. So that's what I call impact and what we see. In terms of, like, there are certain things that are more controversial, some terminologies or topics such as job creation or sharing economy. These have been topics that are called impact by some people, and some people they just call these things are the issues of the everyday. So I would leave this up to you. I don't think I would really want to interpret this on which is impact or which is not. But I think the way we kind of anchor ourselves is we focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and what we see in those 17 goals is what we define are social and environmental issues and what we define as impact. And with the organizations that we work with, the thing that we focus on, and topic of impact measurement is quite controversial in our world as well, what we see as them creating impact is their intention of creating impact. So when we work with a lot of startups. They're kind of our central target audience. And these startups, we look at their intention to create impact first, and then we see if they can measure their impact, etc. So that's would be my 2 cents about measuring, creating impact.
Do y'all have anything to add?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I would say similar in what you had just stated there is in the public goods funding ecosystem, I think we have a very similar sort of problem in that there's this very wide sort of criteria that could constitute a public good, you know, whether it benefits just a very small subset of people within the public or, you know, growing all the way to, you know, having major impact across like a very wide amount of the public. So there's a lot of projects right now that I think can find some way in which they are seen as a public good, and therefore they're eligible to receive funding from some of these different mechanisms that are donating to these various projects. And so that's where we're trying to you know, find where the sweet spot is by determining, you know, how many people were impacted, or like how much impact did this project have on like how many people, and then how much for that individual did they impact as well, because it could be like a very small amount of impact for the individual, even though it touched a lot of different people. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like we're trying to find like where that threshold is, and similar to what Feems have mentioned, like we're using the community to determine that, because at the end of the day, our mechanism uses self-taxation, and so it's that self-taxation that I think, you know, allows us to come to a consensus of where that threshold is.
Cool. So all of y'all mentioned these kind of challenges in being agile and dynamic when defining and measuring impact. You spoke a little bit about defining with community, sense-making processes. Like, I would love, to dig into that a little bit.
So I can use the example of a campaign that we just ran. So in September, we ran Gov Month. And during that month, it was kind of a goal of having the community align on their mission, visions, and values, but also align on what their priorities are in order for us to develop a strategic framework and priorities for the DAO at the end of the month. And so the approaches that we did weren't just surveys. We tried with like incentives, with like Think ARB. We microed those questions as well. So as we know, like there's proposal fatigue. And so we needed to test out different types of mechanisms. We would hold, bi-weekly monthly governance calls with delegates to get a better understanding in regards to like what the priorities are with the higher stakeholders. And then also, develop programs where we knew that there were stopgaps maybe in terms of, the bureaucracy or the proposals to kind of jumpstart some of the tools and projects such as OSO that we feel that we could fund today that can help us align in our frameworks for tomorrow. And so that's kind of our approach.
And then I know you're coming from a complementary but different angle with data standard registries. Could you speak about that a bit?
Yes, I think that maybe taking a step back first, like one thing that we should realize when we situate the amount of public goods funding that's happening on crypto rails versus like how much is flowing through traditional mechanisms in the rest of the world, and many of the things that you're working on, we are like a rounding error in many governments. Like a department within a government, we are a rounding error in terms of how much money we are putting towards public goods funding. So like maybe this year, it might be $50 million, $100 million, which is going towards public goods, through decentralized decision-making mechanisms on crypto rails. That's a tiny amount in the grand scheme of things. And so I think in order for this not only to solve our own problem, but then spill over and change the way that digital public goods are funded more generally, there has to be a story that this is not only a more fun and participatory way of doing things, but it has to be more impactful. And if we can deliver that message, I think the money is going to flow in. For many of these networks, it's existential. If they have a huge treasury and they waste it funding bad things, that's it. You can't just go print more money again and again and again. Maybe once or twice, but you can't keep doing it. And so being able to prove that this funding mechanism or this suite of projects or this type of structure for incentivizing building is more effective is the holy grail, not only for these networks, but then giving much more legitimacy to all of the public goods funding mechanisms that we're trying to build. So I really agree with what Fim said, which is that I don't think we're going to be able to come into a room and figure out, here is this like secret metric or this new standard that is going to unlock all of this impact measurement that was previously unavailable. I think we have to use the tools at our disposal and start getting good at taking stuff that is already visible right now and analyzing it and doing stuff on top of that. Yeah. And then, hopefully what we'll see is a range of different metrics. Some might be really useful for certain communities. Some might be more generalizable. But I think there'll be a huge amount of experimentation that we can do about what impact means for different communities. And if it's on-chain, then it's all visible. And hopefully we can tie more funding to that.
Awesome. Do you guys have anything to add?
No, yeah.
Well, then we can jump into directing to Aisha. What we spoke a little bit about this theory of change as like a framework and guiding principle. Can you share what that is and how it can relate to learnings that we can do in Web3, and also how that is used to address some of these challenges and defining what metrics work?
Definitely. Yeah, I think when we were speaking prior to this panel, I thought that I would bring in some potential content from my world. And I think when it comes to impact measurement, prior to impact measurement, we all need to think about how we're planning what type of impact we want to make eventually. And this applies to private sector organizations, this applies to nonprofits, startups, any type of organization when it comes to impact. So theory of change is basically the basis model when it comes to impact measurement. And it's basically this table that is formed of 5 different columns. And it starts with basically you walk backwards from what type of impact you want to make eventually, your vision of impact in the long term. And then it comes back saying, what type of outcome do you want to generate when it comes to this when it's this vision of impact that you have defined, what type of outcomes that you want to generate. And after that, we come to outputs. In order to create this type of outcome in the midterm from what you're doing, what type of number, quantify this output. What type of output are you going to generate in order to create this outcome? And then it comes back again into the second column. It says, what type of processes, activities do you want to conduct in order to generate this output? And then through this output, through the collection of these outputs, what type of outcome do you want to generate? And then in the first column, it says, what type of inputs do you want to put in? This is basically the number of people that you want to work with, what type of workers that you want to have in your team, what type of processes do you want to put into your business model, like your innovation, all of this comes into your inputs, and through this input, what type of input do you need to have in order to create this output? And then it basically trickles all the way to your vision of impact. I think, I'm not sure, maybe the grant makers would know a little bit better if this gets applied in your grant making processes or in your considerations towards providing grants, but I think one issue we see is even the startups that focus on impact issues, they don't know about theory of change because they get lost in the place that a lot of the startups in the world generally get lost in is financial sustainability and growth. So that's, and we kind of get put the impact side aside, and we don't really focus on it. We think that it's going to be second nature that we're going to generate impact, but that's not the case, because when it comes to funders, they look at your theory of change, they look at your impact analysis, and they look at your impact measurement. So I think starting from this basic level of exercise and building your impact measurement on top of that will be quite essential for any type of organization focusing on impact.
Nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love, if this is something y'all have been thinking about at all, to hear how, that might be applied to our Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I think what you just said is very logical, right? Like, it makes a lot of sense, and that's what we've, in a way, tried to do is just taking it one step further and recognizing like the reputational aspect of it. So like actually having seen some sort of something actually built rather than just purely starting from an idea, because we all know that Web3, there's a lot of grifters, a lot of great ideas can come to mind, but the follow through with that tends to be much less than what what comes from just ideas here. So that's where we're trying to balance this aspect of what we're building in Octane is not going all the way towards just measuring from what Optimism is doing in sort of like a retro way, and not just starting from just purely ideas based, but trying to find like where that sweet spot is in the middle, to where we can recognize that there's something built. There's more intention to continue this building, and then we can be confident about where that funding is going to be going.
Nice.
One of the things that, touching on what you said, and that makes me optimistic that we can learn from and hopefully do differently in Web3, we haven't done it yet, but like that would be the promise, is that like right now when it comes to, if there's a proposal and there's a set of results that a project is promising the donor, then it really requires specialized capabilities to go back and look to see if they actually did that. So someone needs to come and maybe do a survey, or maybe come and actually inspect the project activities and really offer a like auditor's or an impact evaluator's response. And so that's challenging for a couple of reasons, because number one is that you need really specialized knowledge in order to do that type of work. And number two, if anybody's going to, like same thing with science, right, try and replicate the approach, it's not clear whether they would get the same result at the end of that, whether they'd see the same impact. So my hope, at least with like funding digital public goods on crypto rails, is that you can actually make it so that many more people can observe and validate that the impact claim is legitimate and credible. And that opens up the playing field for many more people to do this. And at the same time, it creates a lot more transparency that holds projects accountable to doing work.
So just to add to that, so the issues that I found in grants is really not the projects receiving money, it's whether or not they're going to meet their milestones, but also if there are any gaps in meeting their milestones, how can the DAO organization that's funding it be able to support that? And we see that a lot. And in terms of like, being visible in terms of attestation or like milestone, transparency, we're working with Karma right now to actually do that so that people can see what grants have been what projects have been funded by the programs and at what status their milestones would be, but then also looking at how do we have community assessors to do that too. And so how do we upskill them? Because what we have to recognize is, like, of course, we have really great builders, but the execution layer, though, too, could also fall short, or the project might sound really interesting, but not align with the overall objective or the objective that has changed with that organization that's funding it. So I think that what we have to recognize is that, yes, we could have really great builders and it's a great project, but there could be some human capital gaps, and how do we fill that? And how do we fill that with, like, in terms of the DAO, contributors who then can build reputation and add value to the organization.
And one thing that I find really special about Web3 is the transparency aspect of it, because currently the international development world is basically, led and kind of monitored and controlled by large organizations like the UN and some of the other large international nonprofits, which they kind of take on all the funding and they distribute it. And it's under their control to measure the impact. And what we've experienced, and that I come from a corporate background, so I had no idea about this, is it can be even more corrupted than the for-profit world, because they control the impact measurement of it and they see the gaps, but they don't do anything about the gaps and even the impact measurement of it. There are a lot of studies about this. It's the amount of money that's put into international development is probably 5-10%, maybe max, is used to generate impact. The rest of it is just basically failure money. They know that it's going to go into failure, but we don't have any transparency towards it. When I got into these types of nonprofit projects, I realized that, if my project fails, it's not an issue. It's a reputational issue maybe, but from an impact perspective, it has failed and the funder just moves on. So the transparency, the community seeing the impact of these types of projects is really crucial, I think.
Totally. So related to that, we had spoken a little bit about how do we measure complementary initiatives' impacts on the ecosystem. So, many of our projects are tied together. They actively fund each other. They inform each other. They create the metrics by which other projects are assessed. So, this question of does it really matter to tell what is the impact of optimism grants versus a different grant source, and how to tell those apart, if you have any thoughts on that, and maybe that's even not an important thing to be measuring.
Sure, I'll jump on that one. I think actually that's what is particularly interesting about the capabilities that we have now, is to be able to look at an overall ecosystem and say, here are hundreds of different projects that are decentralized, they're uncoordinated, but because there's a clear statement of what the intent is for funding and the goals that matter to that ecosystem, they can act towards optimizing for that impact and ideally be rewarded for achieving that impact. And you can see this happen by doing nothing more than saying, here's the thing that we want to see, and here's funding that's going to be available and dependable. You see this, of course, with carbon markets, where there's this thing that we now call the carbon credit, and because that exists, you have people all over the world doing different types of projects because they have a reasonable amount of confidence that they will be able to get some funding if they can create and issue a carbon credit. So as we think about an ecosystem, being able to state a goal for an ecosystem, we want to optimize for this, or we want to move in this direction, and then be able to signal that there will be funding for people that have the most impact in that area, can be an incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, I would say one of the things I've recognized at this event, or a few different events, is that collectively the different mechanisms within the public goods funding ecosystem have all recognized we're kind of working in a silo, and what might be knowledge or data from one ecosystem is not very well known amongst others. So you have projects that are just kind of going from pond to pond, just asking for funding, and it's not really clear when the next funding round, or a specific community who has these projects in front of them, where, what the, what all the data is about, where they previously got funding, and having more of a holistic sort of viewpoint about, where I should be allocating my capital towards. So what was really inspiring for me was seeing that a lot of these different mechanisms coming together and recognizing that there is this big gap. And so there's a lot of talk now about building a registry and having the single source of truth, that we can have much better decision making taking place amongst the different communities that are maybe siloed otherwise.
Definitely. And on that same vein, we had spoken about like how we are kind of operating as a mycelial network with these interdependence of projects, and specifically having coordination as a design choice and as a design primitive. What can that look like as we are thinking about applying for grants, designing grant programs, like figuring out, many projects are applying for, retro PGF at the same time as Gitcoin grants, and also at the same time as ecosystem-specific grants, Octane, et cetera. So, what does it look like to be thinking on these multiple levels about cooperation as a design choice?
I can go. So even before I started, I also asked a bunch of friends who worked in different ecosystems, like how their grant process was going. What does their rubric look like? And I think that now, instead of us building in silos, we're recognizing the essentialness of working together and understanding how the others did how others had done their programs and how others had assessed them as well, because they're not unique, right? Like you said, so you have Gitcoin, and we also have a citizen round as well.
Yeah.
And so Gitcoin also had a citizen round, so that we were able to look at, and the same thing with, in general, Gitcoin round or programs or things like this. And so I think that the mistake that we made was trying to reinvent the wheel, saying that oh no, whatever would apply there would not apply into our ecosystem. But when it comes to measurement and impacts and really distribution of funds, the activity is quite similar. So I think that we have an opportunity to learn from each other. And what I'm seeing even more of is more communication, right?
Yeah.
So it's we did a report on our results. I see tons of reports on grants and retrospectives, and I think that having that opportunity to look back and see what worked and what didn't work, and then be able to communicate it to the ecosystem, will provide people an asset to learn from and to build better and together.
Totally. And also, as we are figuring out different elements to define and what is actually important and what to observe over time, it's super useful sometimes to bring in subject matter experts. What do you recommend as a way to engage, because there is both mechanism design experts, like we are hearing from with Angela, as well as, people working in conservation, side of things, or folks that are really familiar like you with defining impact frameworks. What would you say is a good way for engaging these subject matter experts?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think it's great for people from different worlds. I would totally call it different worlds, because even the language that we speak is quite different. Coming together and exchanging ideas and trying to share our experiences and our knowledge in a different way is quite beneficial for our own work and our development of our expertise. But at the same time, I think we can make a lot of analogies from each other's experiences. Even just looking at the technology that's underneath Web3, so I get a lot of experiences and knowledge that I can utilize in my own work. So I find that quite beneficial. I think community creators, community leaders, I think are quite essential in every type of medium, and we have our own community leaders in a different way, but the philosophies are quite similar. So I think one essential subject matter expert that I find really valuable is, in both of our worlds, I think, is community leaders or community creators. So that would be my two cents.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know if I have anything more to add to that. I really agree with what you have to say. I think beyond the community side of things, which tend to be this bridge between the leadership or the decisions that are being made by the org and ultimately who's engaging with it at the user level. I think collectively, searching for the answers that you're trying to solve, this is how I found Carl and the guys who were building HyperCerts, was because they literally saw a problem of understanding impact and different orgs trying to maximize the amount of impact per dollar spent. And so I think just going out and searching for some of the different problems that you're trying to solve, you're going to find there's really intelligent people out there who are collectively trying to bridge these gaps that we're all in recognition of. So just searching for the answers, I think, is the best way to go about it.
Nice. How are we doing on time? Because
It's right there.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, so I guess in our last minute and a half, if anyone has a question from the audience, to direct, Louie.
Okay, yesterday I was at this blockchain for international development, very UN, UNICEF-y type gathering. And I was hearing about the concept of using AI to track impact in international development and social development projects, which initially I had a lot of skepticism and resistance to, but when I thought about it for just automating part of the impact industry that takes the most paid hours that's not going to the actual impact. I'm just curious what y'all's thoughts are on that, and if incorporating AI into measuring impact is part of what's on y'all's tables.
I mean, I can add a few points. I think with regards to measuring impact, AI is quite valuable because one of the issues that we have right now is the platforms that help us measure the impact and help us make that easier. They're quite offline. There are a lot of online platforms that are coming about, but AI as a technology is quite an essential part of that, in my opinion, because it's the collection of data is done quite in an offline way right now, in Excel sheets, all sorts of unnecessary types of tools that make the collection of data really difficult for even these platforms. So potentially AI can add some benefit there. And in terms of the technology generated for social enterprises, I think AI plays a big role there in creating an exponential impact for these social enterprises that I've observed at least.
Could I ask, do you think there's maybe any biases or gaps that the AI wouldn't be able to pick up on in terms of qualitative versus quantitative?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, if from a measurement perspective, there's always a human aspect to talking to beneficiaries especially, which is the most costly part of measuring impact actually. So there's always going to be an offline part, or a human aspect to measure impact, in my opinion, unless AI develops a lot. But I think there needs to be.
I think just to add to that is that we're not there yet, but it does add to the automation in that it could reduce the human capital need for the arbitrary sort of things and allow people, which is the problem right now, with delegates reviewing proposals, is that they don't have enough time to really assess a proposal. And if we would need a follow-up for an expert, we would not have any time as well. So I think in terms of the processes that AI can help in terms of automating that, but also allow the human validators to focus on what's important.
Totally. Cool. Well, thank you guys.
One more question.
I think.
So she just had one question.
Do we have time? Oh. Okay.
Isa, something that you mentioned, I think highlighted the fact that a lot of the funding rounds lately have been single technology based. So Optimism, Golem, Filecoin, whatever. And in order, most of the solutions that actually make a difference in people's lives are combining a stack of technologies, something for login, something for, networking, something for other functions. So what would it take for our collective communities to organize around impact rounds for a certain subject area, like microfinance or privacy or, freedom of the press, and do it at a Web3-wide level instead of a single siloed technology?
I think that's already kind of happening, where you have a lot of these different funding mechanisms, and Feems had said before, it's the community that kind of defines what a public good is. And so to give a shout out to Giveth, they're doing a lot of work on the social side of things. They are donating to causes in Africa that are lifting people out of poverty, and I've seen their org kind of shift towards this impact that is really working towards the social causes. And then you see just this these plural sort of mechanisms just kind of diving into what their communities really value. And so I think with an increased amount of mechanisms that allow for this expansion of their own identity, that will kind of expand being able to branch out into these different areas that need funding in important ways. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but that's kind of how I interpret it.
One spin I'll put on that is I think that one of the things that's been encouraging to a certain extent, with crypto funding, is that there's much more desire to collaborate if you can prove that it's in the public good, right? And in the traditional world, you really don't see that. I think organizations might talk the talk that they want to collaborate, but when you get behind the scenes, they're actually very, very territorial about funding. And there's like a deep scarcity mindset that pervades the sector. I would like to think that, we're going to be able to help do better sense making of things that are actually truly in everyone's interest to fund, and then very easily create rails so that different ecosystems can fund things that are collectively in their interest. I mean, you see a bit of that happening with like crypto policy, but I'd like to see that extend to many more domains that are beneficial for everyone working in the space.
Totally. Cool. Is there any more questions? Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.